Hello. So tonight I'm in the mood for poetry. So I figured I'd read some of the stuff I've been reading recently, read some of it out loud, talk a little bit about it, talk about some stuff related to literature I've been thinking. And yeah, I suppose I'll start with Virgil's Eclogues, translated by David Ferry. And yeah, kind of interesting thing related to this physical book. So it's published by Ferris, Strauss, and Giroux, but when I ordered it, it was printed on demand because it says in the back it was printed in like July 3rd of 2019. So that's pretty crazy that even like, kind of big publishers are printing on demand now, which makes sense. But uh, so my favorite eclogue in this, um, just a little brief description because his eclogues aren't very famous or aren't very widely read, I should say. They're quite famous. But so his eclogues, this is his first collection of poetry that got him famous. It's like pastoral poetry, like shepherds talking to each other. And yeah, this is what made him really famous and got him into the circles of literature and so on. But yeah, Virgil came from kind of the outskirts of Rome, Mantua, and he generally gives off the impression that he was like very humble background, like farmer people and like shepherds going around singing to themselves. But I want to read part of Eclogue number 9 because that's my favorite one. And the two characters are Lycidas and Morris. And Lycidas starts and they alternate. Morris, why are you taking the path to town? O Lycidas, we never thought that what has happened to us was ever going to happen, and now we've lived to see it. A stranger came to take possession of our farm and said, I own this place, you have to leave this place. Heartbroken and beaten, since fortune will have it so, I have to carry these kids to him in town. I only hope bad luck for him goes with them. But I was told Menalcas with his songs had saved the land from where those hills arise to where they slope down gently to the water, near those old beech trees with their broken tops. Yes, that was the story, but what can music do against the weapons of soldiers? When eagles come, tell me what doves can possibly do about it. If the raven on the left in this hollow oak hadn't warned me not to resist, I might have been killed. Menalcas himself might very well have been killed. Oh, how did this calamity befall us? Alas, the solace that your music brought us, was it so nearly lost to us, Menalcas? Who else would sing of the nymphs, and who would scatter the wild flowers on the ground or shade the springs with the green shade of trees? And who would sing such songs as the one I overheard one day that you were singing as you were setting off to visit Amaryllis, our delight? To Tyrus, while I'm gone, please feed my goats, I won't be gone for long. And when you fed them, please drive them down to the water, and when you do, be careful of the billy goat, he butts. Yes, and then that poem addressed to Varus, though not completed as yet. Varus your name, if Mantua can be spared, our Mantua, alas, too close to woeful Cremona. The swans, singing, will carry your name up to the stars. so that your cows may feast on clover grass that makes their udders prosper and be more ample, and so that your bees may avoid the Corsican yews. If you have any song to sing, begin. The Pierian maidens have made me a poet too, for I have songs. The shepherds call me a poet, but I don't really believe them, at least not yet. Nothing I've sung so far is good enough for Varius or Cinna to listen to. My songs are honking geese among the swans. Lycidas, I have been saying the words of a song over and over, trying to bring them back. It's a good old song. O Galatea, come, oh come away to me. Come from the sea, what pleasure is there, there. The spring is here, earth scatters her many varied flowers here, and here the poplar leans above the grotto, where grapevine tendrils laced create a shade. Oh, let the waves crash, raging on the shore. What was that song I heard you singing alone the other night under a cloudless sky? I'd remember the tune if I could remember the words. Daphnis, tell me, why are you gazing only at those old constellations in the sky? Look, Venus's grandson, Caesar's star is rising, the star that brings such joy to the ripening grain and deepens the colors of grapes on the sunny vines. Daphnis, plant your pear trees. Years from now, the children of your children will gather the pears. Time takes away all we have from us. I remember when I was a boy, I used to sing every long day of summer down to darkness, and now I am forgetting all my songs. My voice grows hoarse. I must have been seen by a wolf. Menalcas will sing the songs for you when he comes. The more you put me off, the more I long to hear the song. See how for you the waves make themselves quiet as they come into shore. The murmuring of the breeze is utterly stilled. We're halfway on our journey to the town. The sepulchre of Bayanor is just ahead. See where the laborers have pruned the trees. Morris, let's stop here and sing our songs. Put down the baby goats. We'll make it to town. Or if you're afraid it's going to rain tonight, let's keep on going, but singing as we go. Singing makes the journey easier. I'll carry the basket a while so you can sing. No more of that. Let's just go on our way. The time for singing will be when Menalcas comes. So I think that's really an amazing poem. And I've been enjoying very much reading Virgil lately and reading the Aeneid, especially with the Aeneid being a poem about refugees and all the recent political strife related to refugees. It's very appropriate. And another book I've been looking into recently, if you're interested in medieval French poetry, there's a very interesting one I found that was just recently translated. It's called Aucassin and Nicolette. And it's published by a Michigan State University Press, translated by Robert Sturgis. And it's the only known example of a cantifable, which is like a song story, where some of the sections are in poetry and some of the sections are in prose. And it's about a French knight, or like soldier, Aucassin, who falls in love with a Muslim princess, I think it is, Nicolette. And basically it's a pretty extensive parody of all the romance literature and poetry at the time, because as you can hear, Aucassin sounds like Alcacin or something like that, but he's the French one. And then Nicolette, which is like the most French name you can imagine, is the Muslim character. So, and it parodies a lot of different tropes from the old, like, Canson de Geste, like Song of Roland and all this type of stuff. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. The translation's kind of goofy, but what can you do? Beggars can't be choosers. And so I recently watched this video by a good book video maker called I just forgot his name. Oh, that's a shame. I was just watching the video before I made this. But I will link his channel, and also I will link another channel I've been watching lately called Leaf by Leaf. I'll put links to both of their channels because they don't have many subscribers, but they make very good stuff that's not very common on YouTube about books that are very interesting. Leaf by Leaf has done William T. Vollmann, talked about the recognitions so you get an idea, and then the gosh, it's like Folio Libris or something like that. Ah, man, whatever. I'm just making a fool myself. But he talks about Nikos Kazantzakis, and he also made a recent video on how to read a book, or like why you read. And basically the main idea was, if you're young, you read the best books because you need the best books so that you can gather what little wisdom you're capable of absorbing out of them. But when you become truly wise, you don't read the best books anymore. You can read whatever you want. You can read women's magazines or the back of a cereal box or something. And basically I disagree with that, because I think it's basically the opposite, but the time frame is different. So he's imagining, whenever you're in your late teens, early 20s, you're reading the best books like Dostoevsky or James Joyce, and you're gleaning very little of what's available in the books. And then gradually you read them more and more, and then you reach a certain point where you can read whatever you want, and you get just as many insights as you would from reading James Joyce or Homer or Virgil or whatever. And the only way I agree with that is that whenever you're young, you should read the best stuff so that you can learn as quickly as possible and become wise as quickly as possible. But I don't think you should ever stop reading the best stuff. But I do think there comes a point when you learn enough from the best stuff that you're able to write your own, and you no longer need to read. And you end up only reading out of either a sort of nostalgia or just a comfort, in the same way that you listen to the same music your grandmother may have sung to you when you're a child, or a song you memorized when you were younger. You still sing it to yourself or hum it to yourself, even though you're still not getting anything novel out of it necessarily. Like, I always think of this little anecdote about William Rowan Hamilton, who is a mathematician in the 19th century, British. I think he was British. Maybe he was Scottish or something, but from the British Isles anyway. Mathematician, and he was also very quick with languages, and kind of like John Stuart Mill learned like 10 languages by the time he was 10 years old. And he also participated in like feats of calculations with this American, they were considered child prodigies, but There's this story that in his old age he would sit outside and read uh, Persian texts and Arabic texts to himself just out of comfort because he used to read them when he was younger. I think that's really nice, and I can imagine that. And and then once you learn all you can, you write stuff that is of the same quality as what you've read, ideally. And this is not to imply that I've reached that point yet, but really the last 6 months or so have been, I would say, very difficult. And I find myself pretty much only rereading right now. Like, I've been recently rereading most of E. Cummings. I've been rereading T.S. Eliot's poetry. I've been rereading The Recognitions. I've been rereading Paradise Lost. I've been rereading Herman Melville. I'll come back to Paradise Lost in a little bit. But then, of course, I've been reading Virgil and some other things. But, yeah, I guess I'll read a little bit of T.S. Eliot here, because I was enjoying it so much reading it to myself. This is from The Wasteland. The time is now propitious. As he guesses, the meal is ended. She is bored and tired, endeavors to engage her in caresses, which still are unreproved if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. Exploring hands encounter no defense. His vanity requires no response and makes a welcome of indifference. And I, Tiresias, have forsuffered all, enacted on this same divan or bed. I, who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked among the lowest of the dead, bestows one final patronizing kiss and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I'm glad it's over. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. This music crept by me upon the waters, and along the strand up Queen Victoria Street. O city, city, I can sometimes hear, besides a public bar in Lower Thames Street, the pleasant whining of a mandolin, and a clatter and a chatter from within, where fishmen lounge at noon, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendor of Ionian white and gold. It's just perfect. It's just perfect. And then another poem I've been reading lately that has been one of my favorites for a while is a Middle English poem that you can still pretty easily read, and it still sounds very good. It's called Pearl by the Pearl Poet, or the Gawain Poet. This is the Penguin edition that actually has the original spelling, if you can believe it. And I'm just going to read the first stanza here because it sounds so nice. Pearl pleasant to princes pay, to cleanly clothes in gold so clear, out of Orient, I hardly say, ne proved I never her precious pair. So round, so raken in a chorée, so small, so smooth her sides were. Wheresoever I judged gems gay, I sent her singly and singular. Alas, I lest her in an airbear, their grace to ground hit fro me yacht, I down fordulked of loft dungeer, of that privy pearl withouten spot. And then in the second stanza there's the perfect line. O mole thou Mars, a merry jewel, my privy pearl withouten spot. And that means O world, you harm a precious jewel, my secret pearl without a spot. And it's an allegorical poem, so it doesn't mean one thing in particular. But, you know, the idea of this secret pearl that you always have that is able to console you. It can be a memory, a childhood memory of something that you love to think about, or it can be your spouse or your partner, someone who gives you comfort, someone whose mind you can take refuge in. It could also be a child that you know will continue living and continue down through the generations and hopefully producing some unimaginable goodness that you could never hope for or only hope for. And I mean, just the fact that someone wrote this sort of poem that long ago and you can still read it is very precious, very precious. And also, another recommendation of a nice edition of poetry and also good poetry itself. I'm sure many of you know O Fortuna from the Carmina Burana by Karl Orff, you know, the Nazi composer. Well, he took that from an old German collection of poetry, the Carmina Burana, the Songs from Bern, which was discovered in the early 19th century, but it's poetry from the 1100s by the Galliards, which were roaming scholars who were trying to find royalty to sponsor them or patronize them. And yeah, that O Fortuna is from there. And a lot of these poems are secular poetry, secular Latin poetry from the 1100s, which is extremely valuable because, of course, most of the poetry from that time is very religious and, at the risk of sounding uncouth, very stupid and very simple and very low-level stuff. Kind of like brainwashing propaganda type stuff. And in contrast, this secular poetry, which is kind of like, Beowulf, in the sense that it really gives you such a clear view of someone living at the time. It's so precious, and you can never take this sort of thing for granted. But I just wanted to touch on one last thing, I suppose. I've been thinking a lot about how someone like John Milton could write about guns of the time, or the debate between the geocentric view of the solar system or the heliocentric view, and write about telescopes and all this type of stuff. And this continued, basically, the use or the representation of technology and the furthest extent of science was possible up until the modernist period. And I think one of the best examples is Miklos Senkouthi, his book Prey. But also, Joyce did justice to astronomy of the time and technology and things like that. But even in the modernist period, it was starting to fray the ability of a genius writer to understand enough about science and math and the progress of technology to incorporate it in the book. And the last example that I can think of that did it true justice is William Gaddis in JR. And also Agape Agape to an extent, although that is the same themes are seen in JR. But I wonder why there are no novels of the internet, or there are no novels that reasonably deal with texting or, space travel. Science fiction is pretty much all like horrible shit. Like, anyone who actually reads good literature and cares about their time, like doesn't want to waste time, would never read science fiction. I don't read science fiction apart from like tangential examples like Arno Schmidt. But you have John Barth who did Giles Goat Boy, and he talks about computing and stuff. But I've recently been reading like biographies of people who were in the computing revolution, like Howard Aiken, who developed a computing machine in the 1940s, and uh, Alan Turing is really famous. There's that movie about him, and John von Neumann, who I'm trying to get a hold of his biography. It's difficult. And these people were in the 1940s and 50s. And there is still no worthy commentary through literature on them, of people from the 50s and the ideas of the 50s, computing and information technology and communication like that. Gaddis did his best, and he did a very good job by referencing Norbert Wiener and communication and stuff like that in JR, but it wasn't enough. And since then, I don't know of any just attempt to represent it. The Easy Chain by Evan Dara does something like that. And I know Thomas Pynchon tries, but I don't know. Thomas Pynchon writes in such a simplistic way. It's really kind of crazy, but yeah, because I would want to do justice to the technology of this time and the physics, and like the physics of even 100 years ago is so crazy. If you could use it to learn about the world and use that to transform the way you see the world and create literature from that transformation, it would be unlike anything else, but in that way it would be similar to Paradise Lost, or it would be similar to J.R. by Gaddis, or Ulysses by James Joyce, or Finnegan's Wake, in the sense of using relativity and so on. But no one does it. And when I'm in my English classes, or see creative writing people, and I don't like science, what a fucking doofus, man. How do you not like science? Do you have any hope of writing anything good if you don't like science? Of course not. Like, what do you expect to write? What do you expect to write if you're cutting off like a huge portion of the world? Or people who I don't know. I just look so much forward to Cormac McCarthy's next novel, The Passenger, because it's about Los Alamos and physics and science, and there's no good book recently who talks about science, which is completely bizarre. It's completely bizarre, but I don't want to go on too long in this video, so yeah, death is a gang boss.